When you think of Moses, what comes to mind? The prophet, the lawgiver, the guy who parted the Red Sea, right? He's one of the most monumental figures in all of history. His story is just foundational. But what if the story we all think we know is really just the tip of the iceberg?
See, for thousands of years, the biblical text was pretty much the only source we had, but that's changing. Today, modern scholars are looking at this ancient figure through some incredible new lenses, and they're revealing a picture that's way more complex and, frankly, more fascinating than a simple biography.
So in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the story of Moses through three totally different fields of research. We're talking linguistics, archaeology, and, this is the wild one, data science. And each one of these gives us a crucial clue to a new, emerging story about who Moses really was.
So let's start with the most basic piece of evidence there is, his name. For a long time, the name Moses was seen as one of the strongest pieces of evidence connecting him directly to ancient Egypt. And the logic, well, it seemed pretty straightforward.
For more than 100 years, the general agreement was that Moses comes from the Egyptian root Emshi, which means to be born. You see this root in the names of actual pharaohs like Thutmose or Ramose. It felt like a slam dunk, a solid piece of historical proof. But a linguist named Thomas Schneider decided to zoom in and look a little closer at the actual sounds of the words.
And this is right where that whole theory starts to fall apart. When you break down the sounds, the phonology, it just doesn't line up. First off, the vowels are all wrong. The reconstructed sound of the Egyptian words for born is completely different from the Hebrew Moshe. And second, and this is the real deal breaker, the S sound is wrong. The Egyptian she sound doesn't normally translate into the Hebrew esh sound. So if the name really came from Egyptian, it should sound more like Moshe, not Moshe. Now that might seem like a tiny detail to us, but for a linguist, that's a giant red flag.
So here's the bottom line. That key piece of evidence, the one that ties Moses directly to Egypt through his own name, is, well, according to this analysis, it's on incredibly shaky ground. And that forces us to ask a really big question. If this fundamental link is broken, what other evidence do we actually have?
Which leads us perfectly to our second lens, the physical world. I mean, think about it. If millions of Israelite people lived in Egypt for centuries, then escaped in a massive exodus and wandered the desert for 40 years, they should have left something behind, right? For generations, archaeologists have been digging in the sands of Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. I mean, they have been looking for anything. Settlements, pottery, scraps of writing, campsites, literally any physical trace that would back up this story of a long stay and a huge departure.
And the result of all that searching has been, well, nothing. There was no direct archaeological proof for the enslavement, the plagues, the dramatic escape, or a 40-year journey of 2 million people. This complete absence of evidence is, one of the single biggest challenges to reading the story as a straightforward history.
Now hold on, that doesn't mean there's zero context. We do have a few interesting but very indirect pieces of the puzzle. We have the Amarna letters from way back in the 15th century BCE that mention these disruptive groups called the Habiru. Some people have tried to connect them to the Hebrews, but that's a really heated debate. And then there's the Merneptah stele from around 1207 BCE, which is huge because it's the first time Israel is mentioned anywhere outside the Bible. But it describes them as a people already living in the land of Canaan, not wandering in some desert.
And really, this quote from the scholar H.L. Bosman just nails it. The world of the story, the Egyptian setting, the political vibe, it all feels plausible for that time period. It has contextual plausibility. But there is zero physical proof to confirm that any of the specific events happened or that any of the specific people, including Moses himself, actually existed.
Okay, so if his name probably isn't Egyptian and there's no archaeological footprint, where else can we possibly look? Well, this brings us to our third and by far most modern lens, data science. Believe it or not, researchers are now taking the biblical text and treating it like a massive data set, analyzing it like you would a social network.
So here's the basic idea of how this works. You treat every single character as a node. Think of it as their profile page. And every time two characters interact, they talk, they're related, they fight, you draw a connection, an edge between them. When you map out thousands and thousands of these connections, you start to see the hidden structure of the entire narrative, and you can actually measure statistically who the most important characters are. And what they found is absolutely stunning. In a study by Stephen Massey, he found that the average character in the first 5 books of the Bible is connected to about 4 other characters. Yahweh, or God, is connected to 55. But then you look at Moses. He is connected to 82 different characters. He isn't just the main character. Statistically speaking, he is a colossal outlier. He breaks the scale.
And that's what's so wild about this. Because you might think, well, of course he is. He's the hero. But when you do this same analysis on other ancient epics like the Iliad or Beowulf, their heroes, Achilles or Beowulf, yeah, they're highly connected, but they still fit neatly into the normal statistical pattern of their own stories. Moses doesn't. He and Yahweh are so far off the charts it suggests something totally different is going on with how this story was built.
And it gets even weirder. So most real-world social networks are what we call assortative. It just means that popular, highly connected people tend to know other highly connected people. Think of the popular kids table in a high school cafeteria. They all hang out together. And the network in the book of Genesis, it follows that rule. But the network in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is disassortative. Its main hub, Moses, almost exclusively connects to lots of poorly connected minor characters. This is a pattern you see in artificial networks, like an airline's hub-and-spoke system. And the data shows this whole strange effect is caused almost entirely by one person, Moses.
So, what on earth does all of this mean when you put it all together? You've got the linguistics, the archaeology, and the data science, and they all seem to be pointing in the same direction, painting a brand new picture of who, or maybe what, Moses really is.
Let's just do a quick recap. 1. The linguistic link tying his name to Egypt is probably not correct. 2. The archaeological record is silent. There's no direct physical evidence for his story. And 3. His role inside the text itself is a massive statistical anomaly. He's built into the story in a way that's fundamentally different from every other character. When you bring all these findings together, a new conclusion starts to form. The figure of Moses, as we have him in the text, doesn't seem to be a simple historical account of a man's life. Instead, he looks more like an incredibly important literary creation, a central hub that was deliberately and masterfully woven into the very fabric of Israel's origin story over hundreds of years.
This quote from that data science study just says it perfectly. Moses' enormous role isn't just about him being a character in the story. His centrality is an emergent property of how the story was written. As different traditions, laws, and folktales were stitched together over centuries by many authors, he became the literary anchor that holds the entire thing together.
So this doesn't diminish the text. Not at all. It just reframes it. It makes us shift our focus from asking, did this happen exactly word for word, to a different and maybe even more powerful question. If the story of Moses is the result of generations of brilliant, collaborative storytelling designed to unite a nation and explain their relationship with God, what are the timeless truths it was built to carry? What does the story behind the story really mean?